Now that we are done with all the tiles and assets, there is one last thing we need before moving on to make the background and to assemble the mockup, and that is the characters. I believe that having characters on the mockup will go a long way to sell the illusion of being a screenshot of a real game. So in the next few lessons we are gonna make a Goomba enemy clone, a Piranha plant clone, and the playable character that is not a clone and is completely original, Marlo the Plumber. But before we begin, I want to give you a couple of quick warnings about the way we are gonna work. First, now that we are dealing with more complex and time-consuming illustrations, I'm gonna speed up the pace a bit and assume that you are pretty familiar with all the tools and techniques that we are using. I won't be using anything that I haven't shown you before, so if you have trouble following what I'm doing, rewatch a couple of the older lessons, especially the techniques lesson. And second, this course is not about character creation, and certainly it's not about character creation for games. These characters that we are gonna be making are basically a quick sketch and are not designed in any way for an actual game. If you want to create characters for your own game, you probably are gonna have to have in consideration things like the gameplay or the animations or the engine that you're using. The characters that you're gonna see here are more of a demonstration for the sake of a more complete mockup. However, I believe that there is value in making these characters if you are willing to research more about design and animation and all that. Then you're gonna be able to use everything you learn here. Great, with that out of the way, let's start with the easiest character, the Goomba clone. Again, we are gonna use the grid as a way to guide ourselves. Let's start with the main part of this mushroom with feet, the cap. So grab the ellipse tool and draw an ellipse the size of a single tile. It does not need to snap, just eyeball it. We are using the grid as a rough guide. Now let's edit the shape with the node tool, so go to Path, Object to Path, to get the nodes. Now grab the lower node and move it up till it goes just past the middle point of the tile. Here you can just adjust the nodes to get the exact shape of the cap you want. As far as color, I'm just giving it this orange, but you can give it the color you want. Now let's make the stem. Just use the pen to create this square looking shape. Make the sides a bit bent so they look a bit more organic. And give it an almost white orange. Just crank up the L slider while selecting an orange hue. To me this looks way more pleasant than a grey-white. Now make the back side of the cap. Just use the pen tool and follow the shape of the cap. A light orange will do. Something in between the cap and the stem color. Now for the feet. I want to create these comically big feet. And for that, grab the pen tool and create this rectangular shape. This is gonna be one feet. Now select the top left node and set it to smooth type with this button. And move and adjust this node so it feels like a shoe being looked from the side. Give it the orange color we've been using. Duplicate it to the side. We're gonna make the other feet. But I want to make it so this one is being looked from the front. This is super easy to make. Just grab the other node and set it to smooth as well and adjust the curvature. Okay, now for the last part of the character, the eyes. Grab the ellipse tool and draw one elongated ellipse. duplicate it to the side so it intersects with the other one. How much they intersect, it's up to you. But this is supposed to be the silhouette of the eyes. When you're done, perform a union to join both shapes, and here you can make some adjustments with the node and curves to make the whole shape more interesting. Put it in place and adjust the scale. You want the eyes to leave the silhouette of the cap for that extra comedic touch. Give it a whitish orange like the one you gave it to the stem. Now to create the pupils. These are just gonna be two perfect circles, maybe stretched down a bit. So with the ellipse, draw a circle, make it really small, and for color, just use a really dark orange. So it's a really dark brown. For the last face details, grab the pen tool and draw these two large rectangular eyebrows. Make them look angry. Don't worry if they are not perfect rectangles, they are supposed to be a bit uneven. Draw them so they are not exactly symmetrical. Give them an almost black-gray. And if you want, don't be afraid of adjusting the nodes in the eyes so they won't show through the eyebrows. And we are done with all the pieces of the character. But that doesn't mean that we are done with it quite yet. Like I said a minute ago, now we are working with more organic and complex constructions. Chances are that the shapes need a quick retouch to adjust and harmonize everything. This is especially important if you build a character by drawing all shapes by separate and then assembling them together, like we did. Now that you have the whole character built, you can see how all pieces fit together and make the right adjustments. Based on that, changing the proportions and scale of the different pieces, refine the individual shapes with the node tool, or, why not, remove or add a different shape altogether. After you're done with the finalizing the shapes phase, it's time to give it the outline and the shadows. We're gonna be using a single shadow and no highlight. The characters are already complex enough as they are, we don't need the extra complication. So for the shadows, this one is pretty similar to the shadows in the mushroom power-up. Just grab the pen tool and create a border below, this time a bit thinner than the one in the mushroom. And a shadow to the side. A nice thing I'm doing here is to round off a bit the joint between the two shadows to imply that the border is a bit rounded. Then you join them into a single shape using a union. Don't forget to give it a shadow color. Then a drop shadow on the stem. For the shoes, just a round shadow on the right side. And I want a drop shadow from the eyebrows to emphasize them. And that's it for the shadows. Now the character feels a lot more solid. As far as the outline, we want 3 different outlines. One in front for the 2 feet, one for the head, and one for the stem. So you know what to do. Duplicate the 2 feet, Join them, and make the shape into a thick, darker orange outline and send them below the feet but in front of the rest of the body. Then make the stem outline, follow the same steps, and send them below the stem but in front of the cap shapes. Finally end with the cap outline. This outline is going to have to cover not only the cap, but the eyes, eyebrow, and also the lower part of the cap. So in order to make an outline of that shape, you're going to have to select all those shapes, duplicate them, and perform a union. Now you can use this shape to make the outline. And we are done with our discount Goomba. Now let's move on to our discount Piranha plant. Okay, let's crank up the difficulty just a bit and make a clone of the classic Piranha plant enemy. First, let's make the stem. Grab the pen tool and create this straight line of about 2.5 tiles. Bend it like I'm showing you here, using the minor grid lines to guide yourself. You want to give it this S shape that you're seeing here. This is gonna be the stem, and it has to be very visible and look like it can hold the weight of the head. And finally, give it a light green color. For the head of the plant, make an ellipse of about 4 squares. And scale it horizontally, about less than half a tile. Place it on top of the stem and rotate it a bit down so it better matches with it. You can always adjust this later on, so don't worry about too much about the placement. Finally, give it a fairly saturated red. We need to add the classic lips and teeth that's so characteristic of this character. So using the pen tool, create a triangle to cut out the head shape. Draw a triangle of about 45 degrees. And perform the difference to cut out that section. Here's where you adjust the nodes if necessary. I recommend you to delete the unnecessary nodes and adjust the shape manually with the node tool, till you get something that you like. But a Piranha plant clone is not complete without the lips. With the pen tool on top of the head border, draw this fairly thick arrow shape. Give it a light gray color. As always, I recommend you to leave a trace of the red color so it looks a bit more interesting than plain gray. And now start rounding it. What I'm doing here is holding the Shift key and clicking on a node and drag to the side. This pulls one of the two handles depending on where you drag, and this allows you to introduce a subtle curvature. Getting the shape that you want like this may need a bit of trial and error, so keep tinkering with it till you are satisfied with the shape you get. Once you're done, the next step is creating the teeth. These are pretty simple. just 3 rectangles on each side. Give them a darker shade of the gray of the lips, and move them below them. Now for a couple of finishing touches to the design. We're gonna create this part of the flower that joins the stem and head. In the research that I did, it was called a receptacle or sepal, depending on what these parts are meant to be, which I don't know. I just wanted some shape to add to the back of the head, so they could be either. Also, from now on I'll be calling it the receptacle, because I need a name for it, and to me it just sounds better than sepal. But first, let's analyze the shape, because it can be a bit confusing. This shape can be separated in 2 parts. One, of course, the saw-like teeth, and the other in this trapezius-like shape. You'll see why we are making this shape in a moment. Make sure the trapezius shape follows and covers the back side of the head shape. And then add the saw shape. I recommend you to join them with a union. Okay, so here comes the important part. Remember what I showed you a minute ago about holding Shift to introduce a curvature from a straight corner node? Well, we're gonna do that with all the teeth in this shape. Just hold Ctrl and drag to both sides. You want a nice rounded leaf-like shape. When you're done, give it the color of the stem. And we're almost done, but I think it needs another detail. I want another of this receptacle. You could redraw it again, but it's way easier to just duplicate it and make it larger. Change its color to a darker shade of the green and put it below the other. If you want, you could go in and change a bit the curvature of the teeth so it doesn't look like a duplicated shape. Okay, and for a final detail, I want to add a couple of leaves to balance the design a bit more. This is super easy. You've already done some leaves in the flower power-up, so it's the same here. Just make the leaf shapes with the pen tool and make them really big. What you want is that they balance the overall design, making the silhouette more interesting. Make 2 of them, put 1 on each side, and tinker with the rotation and scale. Give it the same color as the stem. Then if you want, you can create this vein in the middle. Give it a darker shade of the green, and also give it a fairly thick pixel width, enough so it's visible from far away. And that's it for the drawing of the shapes. Now to give it some shadows and details. First of all, I want to start with the lips. So give it a shadow shape on the lower part of the upper teeth and in the lower part of the lower teeth. Then intersect those shapes in and give them a shadow color. You may also want to give the teeth the same color than the shadow color, just for the sake of consistency. For the head shape, we want a shadow on the lower part, and maybe also a drop shadow from the lips. So grab the pen tool and draw these shapes. And when you're done, intersect them inside the head. Don't worry about the receptacle, just put the shadow shape below. Now for the shadows of the receptacle. Of course, we need a drop shadow from both shapes, so you know what to do. Duplicate the shape, move them a bit to the side and down so they are visible, and give them a shadow color. Finally, intersect them inside the right shapes. If you're bothered by the fact that there are two shadows overlapping here, you could just duplicate the black alpha shape and perform a difference with the drop shadow. This way you eliminate the section where they are overlapping. But you also want a shadow for the lower side of the receptacle. Just don't complicate yourself with this. Don't forget that this part is gonna be really small on the screen. Make a single shadow shape that goes through the two shapes. And at the moment of intersect them in, you'll have to duplicate both shapes of the receptacles and then join them with a union and use this shape to intersect the shadow shape. Don't forget that you're gonna have to use a black color with lowered alpha, because it goes through two shapes of different color. The stem and leaves also needs shadows, but in order to be able to intersect the shadows with the stem, we need it to be a path. So you know what to do. Select it and go to Path, Object to Path. Now draw the shadow only on the parts of the stem that are roughly pointing down. So you'll have to separate the shadow into two shapes, like I'm doing here. As far as the leaves, don't complicate yourself, just make the shadows on the lower side of the leaves. Once you're done, intersect them in. For the color, I'm just sampling from the black shadow. And we're done with the shadows. Now for the final step, the outlines. These outlines may complicate you in a couple of places, depending on the way you drew the plant, or more specifically, the teeth. So in order to demonstrate how to solve that problem, I purposefully drew the teeth so they show this problem. But first let's start easy. Let's make the outline of the stem. You know what to do? Select all the paths that makes up the stem, including the two shapes from the receptacle, duplicate them, and join them together. Give it a nice and thick stroke, give it a darker shade of the green of the stem, and move it behind it. And now it's time for the head outline. Select all shapes that makes up the head, including the mouth and teeth. Duplicate them, join them, give them the thickness, the color, and move them to the back as you've done so many times over. But now you're probably gonna have a problem depending on how you drew the teeth. Well, the problem you may encounter is that you made the teeth a bit too sharp, causing Inkscape to flatten the stroke. Inkscape does this to avoid really long and uncomfortable outlines, resulting from really thick strokes and really sharp corners. Most of the time this is exactly what you want, but sometimes, like in the case of these teeth, it can really result in really distracting areas in the outline that call attention to themselves. One solution would be to go to the Stroke tab in the Fill and Sort dialog, and with this option selected, which should be selected by default, increase the number in the input until the stroke in the teeth area are no longer flattened. But now a new problem is evident. Now the stroke in the teeth are too long and they intersect each other. This is the problem Inkscape wanted us to avoid with the default options. Well, the only solution to this problem, while keeping the stroke nice and thick, is to go in there and modify the shape of the stroke manually with the node tool. Modify the nodes, pulling them back a bit while trying to keep the biggest quantity of stroke outline in each teeth. If you see that you can possibly show too much outline because the position of the teeth makes it really hard, you could pick a teeth and move them slightly to the side and adjust the outline accordingly. Don't worry if from up close the stroke looks a bit wonky. What's important is that it looks okay from far away, so zoom out constantly. I know manually adjusting an outline is tedious, but it's the only way to have our cake and eat it too. And here is it, the finalized Piranha plant clone.